Today's project is going to be cutting down a torque tube and drive shaft for a Warford transmission. I just picked one up the other day and I'm going to install it into a 1926 Tudor. As you can see, they're 12 inches long, so we have to shorten the drive shaft and torque tube 12 inches. Because my lathe is small and I can't pass the shaft actually through the headstock over here, what I'm going to do is, this is my 12-inch mark. That's eventually how long the drive shaft has to be. But I'm going to cut it here so I can grab this with the chuck and do my turning on this section here to shorten the drive shaft. And the drive shaft is fairly soft material. I put these two marks on here with my portaband. That one's 12 inches, this one's like 8 inches. And then I had to remove the tailstock off here. And I put this as they call it a steady rest. That's what I'm going to use instead of a tailstock to hold the drive shaft centered. I'm not a machinist by trade, but I have shortened a couple drive shafts and put Warfords in Model Ts, and they're pretty forgiving. Just take your time. Alright, this next part of the video is where I'm probably going to lose some people. But I don't have a Bridgeport to mill this down to get my squares on there. So what my plan is to make this square on the end of the shaft is I'm going to use a grinder and a file, and basically each flat you have to take off roughly 100 thousandths. And you can do it. I've done it on 2 other transmissions right now, and I don't have any vibrations more than the normal Model T vibrations. And just take your time and slowly go at it, and measure often, check your work, just go a little at a time. Here we go. Well, the last part of this video is going to be cutting down the torque tube itself. And really that's pretty simple. Basically you just put a wraparound on the tube, mark 2 different spots 12 inches apart, cut it and make your 2 cuts and weld it back together. You do just have to make sure that you keep everything oriented in the right direction. Okay, now that we've shortened the drive shaft up, our next project is to shorten the torque tube. We got to take the same 12 inches out of it. So start by putting 2 marks on the drive shaft, 12 inches apart. That's going to be our 2 cuts. And you want it in the section that the wall of the drive shaft is straight, so that when you butt it up, you won't have a big mismatch for your weld. So we've got our 2 marks. Then we're going to put a wraparound around it, so we know how to cut it so we have a good cut. Nice straight line to follow. I painted the drive shaft yellow just because being black it was hard to see it. The other thing that's kind of important here is you want to run a line down the top of the drive shaft. 1, 2, so that you have it oriented correctly when you put it together. Otherwise, your rods won't line up to your rear end correctly. And you can do it by either just measuring in between here and finding center and go by that grease fitting up top. That's kind of the easiest way. You can eyeball it, or if you get all fancy, you can use like a center finder. Like one of these. And since we have it, we'll just throw it on there and find our center that way. And the longer your straight edge, the better. Because it's the less chance of having it off, I guess. Less degrees that it's off. TIG welder and weld it out with TIG. I'm using 70S2 for the wire. Basically, make sure this line lines up with that so everything's oriented in the right direction. Get 3 or 4 tacks on it and then weld it out. Make sure you're square. We'll put a straight edge across here. Make sure nothing's cocked one way or the other. When you get done with your weld, I always find the old steel like this kind of looks a little funny when you get done welding. The next thing that we got to do is just shorten the radius rods. On the radius rod, what I've done is I took my tape measure, measuring from this point here. I don't know if you can see the arrow or not. I measured back 24 inches and I put a mark, which is right here. And I cut 11 inches off of this rod here. My starting mark is at 9 inches, 9¼ inches actually. And I cut 11 inches out of that section. And I've got it, we had to hit it a few times here to get it so this rod will slide inside of this rod. And I've drove a screwdriver in the crack that's in here enough to spread this. And then we're going to tap this down until we have 12 inches to our line. 12 1/4. From our mark to our mark is 12 inches. Now we just gotta, I'm gonna TIG weld that up, and I will also TIG weld this seam up. And you can see that that's how much my two overlap each other. And that's how I shorten my radius rods. And the second one will be same as this one. The weld didn't come out too bad. Right there on the bottom, you can see it had kind of heavy rust there. So it's a little rougher looking. If you run into a bunch of porosity, you can always kind of, if it doesn't want to go away, you can get rid of it by putting a little stainless wire in your weld, and that will eliminate the porosity. It's kind of a little tip and trick. All right, that's it. Bye. Okay, on my video earlier about shortening the radius rods, I have a mistake on there. Because we shortened the drive shaft 12 inches, the radius rods actually have to be shortened less than that because of the angle that they're running at. And you can see, this is the one I shortened, and I've actually, luckily I had another set of radius rods. I had to cut another one, cut that weld out, and make it a little longer. It's about an inch difference from here to here. And that's all that trigonometry stuff that I didn't take into account. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this bolted up in place, bolted up on the rear end, and make this weld in position. That way I don't have another screw up. All right. Hope you guys can learn from my mistake. Thanks.